It is Friday, January 6th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hi everyone, welcome back. First off, I am so sorry that the audio for this is not going to sound very good because I'm more or less in a blank room. I did not have enough time to get anything really unpacked, so there's going to be a lot of echoes with my voice bouncing off all this open space, but I had just enough time to set up my desk, computer, camera equipment, and I built my shelves. That's basically it. So I am sorry, bear with me. Next week should be much better, but we still have PlayStation news to go over. So first up, as always, our PS Plus reminder. The January PS Plus Essential Games are now live, so go add those to your library. And first up, this story came out right after LTPS from last week, but it was Silent Hill, A Short Message. If you remember, that was rated in Korea, and now it got a new rating in Taiwan. And this one specifically outlines PlayStation 5 as the platform, so we should be seeing what this is fairly soon. Things don't get rated for no reason, and more so it's not something where it was publicly revealed and let's say it had a release window or no release window, right? It's not something like that. I mean, this thing is likely going to be released fairly soon, you suspect, just based off the theory and the descriptor of this being kind of a shorter playable teaser kind of thing that might show up on PSN at some point. So I presume that we should see this fairly soon. Let's hope that that is the case. Moving on to our next news story, over on the official Naughty Dog blog, Neil Druckmann recently gave an update on what's going to be a very big year for the Last of Us franchise. First off, confirming that the entire franchise has sold 37 million copies worldwide as of December 2022. Very big number. But he also provided an update on the Last of Us multiplayer where he says, and I quote, "Later this year, we will begin to offer you some details on our ambitious The Last of Us multiplayer game with a team led by Vineet Argaval, Joe Pettinati, and Anthony Newman. The project is shaping up to be a fresh, new experience from our studio, but one rooted in Naughty Dog's passion for delivering incredible stories, characters, and gameplay. We first shared concept art of the project with you last year, and we hope this new piece of concept art below further excites you for what our team is working on." Now, looking at this concept art and also comparing it to the last one, I don't know about you, but for me, this really illustrates a certain sense of scale. Now, it is concept art. It doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly what we're getting, but just when you sort of factor in that this is going to be Naughty Dog's first standalone multiplayer product, and this was a project that got hit with the typical Naughty Dog scope creep. You know, it was supposed to be, or at least we assume it was going to be a Factions 2, not necessarily tacked on, but a part of the Last of Us Part 2, which, you know, that was years ago now at this point, so clearly this has evolved into something a lot bigger, and for me it was always something where I just kind of figured that maybe we're looking at a sort of, and I like to say like a Division-esque game where it's a very big environment. There's PvP and also PvE elements, so whether you're overlooking a giant city and everything that you can see is explorable, or, you know, jumping onto a cruise ship and you can like check each room individually, like I think there's a lot of ways this can go. So it's just concept art, but that's, you know, that was my gut thinking there. And we should be seeing, I mean, we already knew that we were going to find out more about the game this year, and now we're finally here, so that's good. I hope it's going to be playable to some degree this year. It would be rather disappointing, I think, if the game still isn't quite ready to at least have some kind of playable beta this year. My thinking was maybe like Q2 is when we could at least have some kind of beta, but we'll see. Now, really the big news from this past week was CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, and you know, Sony's always there to talk about their cameras, TVs, now the Sony Honda Mobility Initiative, and sometimes PlayStation is there. You know, in recent years, they've actually had a much larger presence, and this year is no different. So first off, we had Asad Kizilbash of PlayStation Productions and the Gran Turismo movie director Neil Blomkamp showed up to give us our first look at the movie. They discussed how they utilized Sony's cameras to capture unique and unusual camera angles for the cars and all the driving sequences. And as for the actual look at the film, it was more of a promotional video, not quite a proper trailer, but, you know, we saw some clips. And as a reminder, this is based on the true story of Jan Mardenborough, who went from playing the games to driving professionally through the Gran Turismo Academy. And we just mentioned last week how they had wrapped filming, and that was again confirmed here, where they talked about how Neil just recently got back from being done filming the movie. So seems like it's on track for its August 2023 release. Now, as for more direct PlayStation game announcements, we did have the SIE president and CEO Jim Ryan show up, and this is where we actually got a fair amount of announcements for PlayStation games. So first up, PS VR2. The launch lineup has now been updated to include more than 30 games, which previously we were told more than 20, but that number is now more than 30. So by our current count, we've got 23 confirmed so far, but it seems like there's going to be at least 8, 9 more maybe to find out. The latest addition to that launch lineup, and it's a big one, and we were all kind of hoping this would eventually happen, it's Gran Turismo 7. It's getting PS VR2 support as part of a free day one upgrade. The only issue, though, is that at the time of filming, we don't know to what degree it supports PS VR2. It could be fairly limited like GT Sport, so we'll have to pin a big asterisk on that one for the time being. Another game announcement is Beat Saber, an extremely popular VR title, will also naturally be getting a PS VR2 version as well. No other details were shared, but we should hear more about that soon, and that game might be a bit more complicated in terms of all the DLC items, and if you'll have to pay for to get the PS VR2 version or not. We don't know that just yet, but that game is coming. Now, Sony also made a very big announcement for their next step in accessibility, and it's called Project Leonardo, a highly customizable accessibility controller for PlayStation 5. This was designed with consultation and support from able gamers, Special Effect, StackUp, and many other independents in the accessibility space. Project Leonardo is designed to work without setup right out of the box, but is also highly configurable from a hardware standpoint. Buttons can be swapped around, and the distance of the analog stick can be adjusted in order to suit the variety of needs one may have for their strength or the range of motion. There's also a wide range of software customizations as well, like being able to map 2 button presses to a single physical button. Project Leonardo can also be used either standalone or with another Project Leonardo, and you can also throw in a DualSense for up to 3 physical controllers on a single control scheme. The device also has 4 3.5mm auxiliary jacks, so it can be extended with a variety of external switches or third-party accessories. You can also lay it completely flat on a table or wheelchair tray, and it can also be secured to amps mounts or tripods. In a conversation with Wired, Jim Ryan talked about its development and basically confirmed they've been designing and working on this for a number of years. So this is awesome news, especially because Microsoft's been offering the adaptive controller for a few years, and that thing's great, but this has been sorely missing on PlayStation, where Sony's been fairly good on offering a wide range of accessibility options in their first-party software. But that's based on the game that you're playing. So with The Last of Us Part 1, Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, there's a lot of, really useful gameplay modifiers and audio cues and visual cues that you can toggle to really help any kind of impairment that you may have. But at the end of the day, you still have the massive hurdle of the controller itself. So great to see that Sony is finally, and it seemed like it was a natural step for them to finally offer something like this. And of course, I'm not really an accessibility expert, so I can't speak on the look of it, how it may or may not be useful, but it does seem like they've approached the right groups to have them come in and really shape the usefulness of this device. So hopefully by the time it launches and the reviews come out by those that would say need a device like this, hopefully it's very useful. I think the only concern may or may not be the price tag. The adaptive controller on Xbox is $80. That's not too bad. So as long as they're not too out of position there, which, if you need 2 of these things, that's where it could get costly. So hopefully it's as cheap as it can be. Now, the final PlayStation announcement at CES was Jim Ryan talking about PS5 sales and how for the month of December, it was the biggest month for PS5 console sales. They've now reached a worldwide total of over 30 million PS5 sold globally, which is a huge number, and also something where if we go back to our Tuesday PlayStation predictions video, I'd mentioned how my 2022 predictions, for sales at least, was not right, but when grading myself and trying to figure out where they're at right now, I'd said they're probably around 30 to 31 million, so it seems like at least that part of it was true, which means they're pretty much on track to hopefully sell 36 million by the end of March this year, so in a few months. And then perhaps they'll be on track to do the number that I think they'll do for the entirety of this year. Jim Ryan also talked about how the stock shortage is pretty much done. They've caught up, they've made a lot of PS5s, and it seems like they finally have reached that true demand level. So he more or less said like it's going to be much easier to buy PS5, whether it's online or at retail. So we've been seeing more and more people just show up at stores and actually see PS5s out in the wild, which is kind of still an unusual occurrence, but hey, it looks like we're finally there. The PS5 stock shortage seems to be over. Now, if we want to be technical, there was one other thing at CES, which was, of course, Sony was going to talk about the Sony Honda Mobility Initiative, which they showed off the concept car again, but now it's got a name called a Fila. And for a brief moment, you can see on the rear screen in the back seat, there is a small, you can see Horizon Forbidden West being played on that screen, which is really Sony pushing pretty much all their initiatives, all their business segments into this one core product, which is the Afeela concept car. We had heard Sony say like, oh yeah, it's possible, we could throw a PS5 in there. And it's not like there's anything groundbreaking being done here. Anybody could really put an LCD screen in the back seat of their car and find power and play a game console back there. But it's just funny how they chose to display this in the concept car. Like, look, PlayStation, it's there, and the car, look. Like they're really gonna ship the car like that. Next up, this one isn't really all too surprising, just because we kind of already knew all this, but it was publicized again based on a tweet from Tom Farnsworth over on Twitter where he's the senior design lead at Bungie, and he was showing off a picture of this shield in his home, which has a bunch of emblems that are supposed to represent a bunch of Bungie or a bunch of Destiny products that have been released throughout the years. And Tom says in a follow-up tweet, and I quote here, "And with the support of Sony, we are working on a number of unannounced projects. Come join us." And he talks more about the missing metal in the picture. But we already knew they were, making a bunch of games, not just Destiny. There's unannounced projects at Bungie, but once they were acquired, who's going to be funding that? Well, it's going to be Sony. So that's why this isn't all too surprising, but it is worth noting just in that any company has money, right? So whether they're acquired by Sony or say Activision, right, where they were getting funding from Activision, any company can show up and write a check, but it's more about how they're managed or how they're unmanaged, letting them kind of work independently and what resources are available to them, right? So I think that's kind of the big deal for Bungie being under they're not directly under the PlayStation Studios label, but at least, being funded by Sony and having access to the PS Studios resources, having that collaborative process happen between Bungie and now PlayStation Studio developers. It kind of opens the door up to how they're going to make their games, and that might evolve in a good way, especially when Bungie is going to be independent. So they're going to ship their games on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, possibly Nintendo. So it should bode very well for the quality of their games in the future on all those platforms. Moving on, we have a small but still very nice to see update on Discord voice coming to PS5, where recently there was a Discord data mine, and there's more references to more or less linking your account to Discord, which we can already do, but more so it's about sending voice calls to PS5. We already saw that before with a screenshot from a few months ago, and again, Tom Henderson from InsiderGaming.com reconfirmed that the firmware update that's going to include this is due for March of this year. So actually not much longer of a wait to possibly have Discord voice on PS5. So just keep in mind that that's coming, or it should be coming fairly soon. So 2 years after PS5's launch, and it seems like the console is, mostly reliable. There hasn't been some kind of like widespread complaint or report of consoles failing in mass, or some kind of like common issue that keeps popping up. A few things here and there. There was the coil line that showed up at launch, but of course it doesn't seem to bother most people when you can't necessarily even hear it more often than not. But that came up. Stick drifting is certainly, I think, the biggest one at this point, which still we don't know exactly how widespread that really is. But the point is, PS5 so far has been mostly reliable, it seems. However, there was a recent story that broke out about well, more or less the notion that maybe keeping your PS5 in a vertical orientation is not good for it because of the liquid metal and how it may spill onto the motherboard. So over on Twitter, at 68Logic, who owns a repair shop in France, mentioned this recently on Twitter about what happens when your PS5 is vertical. And this goes back to last year where Ben Montana, another repair shop owner, documents the problem of liquid metal spilling out of the seal and also due to the console being in a vertical position when, say, it's being stored. So this is something where another repair technician, the Coder on YouTube, shows a console that has never been opened, as in it's a brand new console. It's been stored for about 9 months without being opened. It had a liquid metal leak as well. So whether whether you bought the console, you get it home, it's working, you store it vertically, or let's say the console hasn't been sold yet because when it's in the box, it's technically vertical, just based on like how you set it on the ground, it's still going to be vertical unless you tip it over sideways. Or rather face it flat, but either way, there's the notion now being put out there, or at least being recently publicized, that you shouldn't have your PS5 in a vertical orientation based on these recent accounts that are now finally being highlighted. So my thoughts on this, at least initially, is that it's 2 years later. This is around the time where we might see like long-term issues pop up. So it's not like I would say this is like for sure a problem and you should be highly concerned if you have your PS5 in a vertical orientation as of right now. And I'm not going to call any of these people, say, liars. I mean, clearly they're, if they're running repair shops, if they like to tinker with consoles, they're going to be seeing, a bunch of consoles that are broken, and they're going to see common issues and things where maybe Sony could improve their hardware. That's just how these things go. So it's not like they're wrong per se, but they're always going to see broken machines. So it's more about the volume of consoles, right? So we've got 30 million PS5s out there so far. This is the first that we're hearing about it, which technically, again, would sort of line up with like long-term ownership. We have to wait for these consoles to be out for a long time before we see some of the, first failure points, right? So, and even 2 years is not that long, of course. You would want this thing to have a shelf life of at least, I would say, a decade before things start, failing on it prematurely. And in this case, it's the matter of the seal for the liquid metal. So perhaps the seal isn't good enough, right? And so that's why if you keep it in a vertical spot or vertical orientation, the liquid metal could be, puddled towards the bottom. And if the seal isn't good enough, then that's where it'll leak out, and it's going to easily, fall onto components, and you could have a short and basically kill the PS5. So if you do lay it, say, horizontally, even if your seal is bad, then the liquid metal kind of stays where it is. My thing, I would say don't worry just yet. I mean, if you want to be super cautious, then go horizontal. We just don't have enough data. So it's just, I'm always wary of anything like this where there's complaints of an issue about any sort of, it doesn't matter what the product is. If there's complaints about something, people are going to tend to be more vocal. So it's always a matter of waiting long term to see just how widespread of a problem it really is. So that's kind of how I would approach this for now. But, certainly this would show up at some point, right? It's not like that would not be a failure point for the consoles, having the liquid metal, escape out of its chamber. So that could happen in theory. And that's what these repair technicians are seeing. But how widespread of a problem is it? Should you not keep your PS5 in a vertical orientation to avoid this? I don't think we're there just yet, but if you want to be cautious, then sure, maybe place it horizontally for now. But it's really about year 5, 6, 7. Then we'll see other failure points crop up, and that's where that's where we might have more insight into the best way to maintain these consoles long term. Moving on to our latest update for the Microsoft ABK deal. Recently, during a preliminary hearing, the FTC has confirmed that Microsoft intends to close on the deal, even if the FTC does not give them approval, if Microsoft does get approval with the CMA and the EU. So if they get approval there, and based on any sort of concessions or remedies that they make with those bodies, they'll also offer those to the FTC in order to at least, attempt avoiding a, federal lawsuit. But essentially, Microsoft intends to close on this deal if they get approval in those other territories, and they'll just, they'll continue fighting it in the US. More or less, this means Microsoft is, well, not only committed, but basically they have a level of confidence that if they have to take this to a federal court, they would win. And I would say they have a very good shot at winning that, which means this makes a lot of sense. If they have, if the CMA and the EU give them a problem, then that's where it could get really tricky. Not sure how they would approach that, but basically, if they get approval in two very big places, they're just gonna, whatever, we're just gonna do it. And going back to the CMA, which we were supposed to find out their final answer by the end of March, they've already delayed that to April 26th, but we should be hearing about potential concessions or remedies that they might offer and more concerns. Basically, they're going to publish more things around late January or early February, somewhere around there, which means we're going to have, probably another long PDF to go over. But that's currently where the situation stands. And that kind of also goes back to the predictions video where I can see Microsoft not backing down. But I also thought this is going to drag on this is going to go into 2024. But if they just go ahead and close by, let's say, around July, which is when they have to close on this deal, that would be, that'll be fun to watch that unfold as well. But that's where we currently stand. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter. And if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very simple. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories from this past week, and our Tuesday video was our 2023 PlayStation predictions video. It's hard to get used to this room already. I am so sorry for how this sounds. It should be better by next week, but I really had no time when it came to getting this room set up. And also, I'm short on time right now, so I'm not sure how much better I can improve this in post. We'll see, but this should be the only week where it's like this. Anyway, 2023 PlayStation predictions video. So 10 new predictions for the PlayStation business for the next 12 months. Go check it out. And hopefully this looks a lot better by next week once I have things actually set up. It's going to look very similar to the last one. I'm not doing anything too crazy, but it's just a lot more space that way. So that's the exciting part, is that I'll have, most of my collection. And yes, you will finally see it. I've got a whole thing I'm doing, so that'll be fun to upload once I finally have that completed. But that's it for now. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.